É com grande satisfação que damos as boas-vindas ao professor Dr. Etienne Wenger, trainer, e à professora doutora Beverly Wenger, trainer, que irão falar sobre comunidades de prática e o seu impacto na aprendizagem colaborativa. Informamos que esta sessão conta com uma tradução simultânea e será um momento indicado para quem não o fez ainda, ou para requisitar os audioguias ou para ligarem os mesmos. Obrigada.
So thank you for inviting us. It's very nice to be here. We live in Sesimbra, so just up the road. Yeah.
And as a way to introduce ourselves, because, you know, we are not education researchers. And it is interesting that this conference is about innovation, pedagogical innovation. Because when we started this work in the mid-80s, the idea was to create a new approach to pedagogical innovation. It was in the US, and the Department of Education had just put out a report called A Nation at Risk. You can imagine what the report was saying without reading it. And a man called John Seeley Brown had this idea that there will be schools of education doing research on education, but somebody should rethink, how do we understand learning? Can we come up with new learning theories? And that will be the source of true pedagogical innovation. So it was interesting. Now, it so happened that the theories that came out of that research was more quickly adopted by business and by government, and not so much by education at that time. Now it's beautiful to be here and to come back to our original audience of people who are thinking about learning and how do we innovate when we are trying to help people learn. So we're going to talk about a learning theory, not a concept like community of practice, which is part of the theory, but it's only part of the theory. We're going to talk about a learning theory. Too fast?
Okay. So yes, and so we do three things, Etienne and I. We do consultancy for organizations, for businesses, for government, non-government, development, a little bit in education, but those places where they have adopted a different learning theory. And we use our consultancy to inform our theories, and we test our theories with our clients, and then we rewrite the theory. So really the theory that we write is like action research. So it's based on what works in practice. So we write books as well.
Yeah, maybe we should say, we write two kinds of books. On the top are books about learning theory, how to conceptualize learning from an informal social perspective. And then on the bottom are more practice-oriented books for people who are taking this approach in different contexts. So we write the two kinds of books.
And we also run workshops in Sesimbra in what we call the Social Learning Lab, which is our house.
And you can see
in Sesimbra.
That's in the middle there.
Yeah.
That house in Sesimbra.
Yeah.
So we do the three things, but it's important to say that for us, those three things are three learning moments. Engaging with concrete problems with our clients pushes our thinking, it's learning. But for us, writing is also learning, because you can have some ideas, but when you put it on a page, then all of a sudden you need a rigor of thinking that is different from just doing some projects. Okay. So writing books for us is also learning.
And our workshops are learning too, because we have people from all over the world, from different organizations. They bring their challenges, and we use our theory to help them think through their challenge that they're facing.
So we are learners, really, very much.
So, yeah, we start from the idea that your learning theory matters. Okay? And the learning theory, the traditional learning theory, or the one that has got most traction in the 20th century, is the learning theory on the left. Somebody knows. A study has been done. There is an expert. There is a technical expert. And that person transmits what they know to people who don't know. And learning takes place because those people who are listening now know. So that is the learning theory that is behind a lot of traditional education and behind training.
And then on the right, you have a bunch of professionals. These are actually heads of treasuries in Southeast Asia, brought together by the World Bank to discuss how to run a good treasury in these countries. Okay? And they have problems that they share, like how to deal with the central bank and things like this. You don't need to know the detail to know that they are around this table.
Slower, Etienne.
They are around this table talking shop. Okay? There is a person from the World Bank, but he's not teaching. He is just facilitating a conversation. And so these people, what drives their learning is not the certainty of someone else. It is their uncertainty. Their uncertainty, the things they don't know, the things that they are struggling with. That is what drives the learning. And they are also making progress. But it is in this mutual engagement of uncertainty. And so if you look at kind of the details of these two views of learning, this is what we would say.
So one is driven by certainty, by something that is known. The other type of learning is driven by what is not known.
And there, you know, the acquisition of curriculum is central. Okay, this is what you should know. The Department of Education has decided. This is what you should know. Here, what is driving the learning is the desire to make a difference. I want to be a better doctor. I want to be a better teacher. I want to be a better street gang member, you know, selling drugs, you know, whatever it is that you care to do drives the learning.
The content in the traditional learning theory is designed by experts and transmitted. But the learning in social learning theory is driven by participants who want to learn how to make a difference.
And you can see how that will be a driver of innovation, because if you really care to make a difference, and you are with others who also care to make a difference, out of that uncertainty, engagement of uncertainty, comes new ideas.
And the accuracy of the information that you provide in the traditional learning theory is very important, and it is important. Okay? But important in social learning is also the quality of the relationships of the people who are there, that they feel like they can talk to each other. They know that other people will listen to them and understand their problems. Also important in social learning is a diversity of perspectives, because it's that way that you get new forms of thinking by having people with different perspectives all addressing a similar challenge.
And on the right, what is important is not so much the accuracy of information, although that can be important too, but what is important is what kind of relationships have we developed? Can I talk about my practice? Is there enough trust that I can tell you that yesterday I was with that student and I wanted to kill him, because he was so annoying and I was so mad, and I didn't kill him because I don't want to go to jail, but I was feeling like it. What should I do with this? You see, if you can talk about the reality of practice, which is not always beautiful, but you can talk about the reality of practice as the foundation for learning together, that requires a quality of relationship that is essential to social learning. And of course, the diversity of perspective,
We've talked about that.
We talked about that. Okay.
So just to summarize in a way, in social learning, there are three important dimensions. That the people in the social learning space, they care to make a difference. And in order to make that difference, there's no clear answer as to what they should do. So they engage their uncertainty. Right? They talk about what they don't know. They ask each other. They share their problems of practice, which are not easy to resolve. And in their interaction, they pay attention because they may hear an idea that will be useful to them.
And I think it's important here to appreciate how profound and personal these things are. What difference do you want to make? If you think of yourself as an educator, what difference do you really want to make? It's a question that we don't often ask of people. Reflect on the difference you want to make. For some people, they just want to make a bit of money. They come at 9 o'clock, they leave at 5 o'clock, and they don't care. They're not there for 8 hours at work to really try to make a difference. They just obey whatever they are told to do. And so the first part of facilitating learning in this process is, what difference do you want to make? Can you express that? Can you respect that?
And engaging uncertainty. It's easy to say, we should engage our uncertainty. But it's hard, right? It's hard to show that you don't know something. You have to be vulnerable. So that means that also in social learning, you have to create spaces where it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to talk about what you don't know as much as what you do know. It also means you have to have the right people in the room, because if you don't have the right people in the room, if you have the bosses, if you have the big boots who wants to make a point, they'll fill the space with everything they know, right? So it's a subtle dance of ensuring that people are able to engage their uncertainty.
Actually, I have to say that I have learned something really interesting in the process of negotiating this theory with Bev, because she told me, we talk about engaging uncertainty, and that sounds good. But for you as a man, when you engage uncertainty, people say, he's so humble. And she says, for me as a woman, if I engage uncertainty, people think, this woman doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm going to teach her.
Well, actually, most men will jump in with the answer.
So it is a delicate thing, And paying attention is different when you are asking your students, pay attention in a conference. Pay attention. Don't think about your dog. Pay attention. I'm going to teach you something. That's one way to pay attention. Here, you pay attention because you want to make a difference and you want to see, is there something new here? You pay attention to the new possibilities that emerge out of the engagement. And it's not that easy, because often we just see the world through what we know, what we think. And to really pay attention to what is emerging is a quality of engagement with the world that is quite special and very different from paying attention to the teacher. So this is sort of like our theorizing about social learning. Somebody asked us, so what is a social learning? And for us, it is when those three things come together. It creates a space, a social space that has a very special quality.
Okay, and people often ask us, okay, so tell us exactly the definition of a community of practice, right? It's a foundational part of the theory. What is a community of practice? So we have this design, this picture, to help you to know what a community of practice is. We'll start in the top left of this picture. You have people who come together because they want to make a difference. They engage with each other, they talk to each other because they want to make a difference. And, if you go to the second one, they enjoy being with others who understand the difference they want to make. They don't get bored, right? They understand the difference you want to make. And they appreciate your uncertainty about how to make that difference. So they know enough about you, your circumstance, your practice, that they will, understand you when you say, I can't do it, it's hard, or I've got a problem.
And that's the good thing about practitioners, is that they know that practice is hard. I'm sure when you have two teachers talking to each other, they know that to be in front of a classroom with 25 kids who come from different contexts, who had different experiences last night, it's hard. Practice is hard.
And out of those interactions, they get new ideas. They have insights. Maybe they learn some new tools, some new methods. They make friends. They have a network. They get stuff. They get things. And often, actually, we think of education or learning as stopping there. Oh, you've got something from it. Good. Learning.
Or we design a test to see if the curriculum has made it into that head. Okay? And that's the end of learning.
But in a community of practice, you are as interested in what people do afterwards with what they learned. Nobody ever applies something faithfully. Things that work are always adapted. Mm-hmm. You adapt, you find the right time, the right person, you try it, it doesn't work, you adjust it, you try it again, right? Nothing ever goes perfectly from a good idea into practice. And so you put it into practice and you notice, does it work? Or does it not work? You have the flower living or the flower dead, or somewhere in between. But you notice what happens. And you take that story back to your community of practice. So the community of practice, the learning resource in a community of practice, is not an expert. It's not a technical method. The learning in a community of practice is the stories of what people have tried in practice and what worked and what didn't work. And so a community of practice is a loop. Okay? It's a loop that goes round and round of people recycling what they're doing, what they're trying out. Maybe somebody did find a new study that was helpful. Maybe somebody found a method. But they talk about what they did with it in practice, right? And how it worked for them or not.
And it's important to specify that from an institutional perspective, it's not obvious to support this kind of learning. I remember we were talking with a group of people. They were from a community college in the US. And they had a committee of practice on pedagogical innovation. And they had a problem because the teachers were evaluated once a year. And so they said, well, it's great to have this discussion about innovation, but if I try something new and it's the day that I'm evaluated, I will lose my job. You know? So they had to talk to the management of the school and say, okay, when you do when you go and evaluate a member of our community, always make sure that there is another member of the community who comes with you. That was their solution to the risk of innovation in a strict institution. So innovation is not risk-free, and yet that process of learning can lead to beautiful innovation.
So, yeah, really, in short, a community of practice is this middle picture, this middle diagram, where people share a domain of practice, whether it's teacher education, in another community it might be engineering, in another community it might be health, right? But people share a practice and share a domain. But we show this picture in contrast to two others which people often confuse for a community of practice. The first one is what you often see, which is a website online. And you're invited to come in, monthly seminars. There are resources there. You can come in, you have access to new resources, to good resources, access to experts, access to seminars, access to training. And in this type of, people often call it a community of practice, most important is how many members you have.
How long they stay.
How long they stay in the page, how many people are showing up for the webinars, how many people are downloading the resources. This is not a change of learning theory. This is just using technology to support the traditional learning theory, to open up the technology, the books to more people. The expertise, the certainty, is to open up the certainty to more people. And there is nothing wrong with it, but it is not a community of practice.
And then there is the third image down on the right. Actually, it's interesting because we created this slide for a client recently. They were about, it was a European project on food fraud prevention. Okay? So it's a big thing about food fraud. You know, if you buy cheese that says it's made in Portugal, but it's actually made in
Spain.
In Spain or something, you know. So there was, and they said we want to create a community of practice, a European community of practice of food fraud prevention. And we were saying, that is a good idea because we really need to learn from practice. But is it the best way to think about food fraud prevention as one community of practice? Or is it more useful to think about it as what we call a landscape of practice, where there are different practices, and the learning has to connect those practices into something that promotes learning.
Because you have the researchers, you have the policy makers, you have the educators, you have many people with different practices.
You have the companies.
And you have the businesses. And you have the
labs.
The labs. So you have many different practices. And people somehow think that if you bring all these different practices into one room and say, okay, let's all collaborate, that you will have a community of practice. And we just want to say that is not a community of practice. In our language, that is a landscape of practice.
And so in that perspective, it's as important for regulators to talk to researchers as to talk to other regulators. But you should still talk to other regulators because they are your colleagues. They understand your practice. But to talk to researchers or to talk to labs or to talk to regulators, business, people who are in the food business, these are learning relationships that are different from talking to a colleague who has the same practice. And so what we are proposing to this group is to say, okay, you need to have a kind of convening team that looks at the boundaries that exist in that landscape and say, how can we create new conversations, both within and across different practices, to foster innovation? Because no single community can be in charge of creating the innovations that that field requires. So, just to let you know how the concept can be applied in practical contexts. So, let's just become concrete for a little bit. So, here we have an example of a community in a big multinational beer company, and for them, the purpose of creating communities of practice is for people working in the different country offices to be able to help each other. So they have monthly meetings. These meetings are on Zoom because they live in different parts of the world.
And what they do is that every time they have a meeting, one member will propose, all right, I have something here, right? And they may, for example, say, I have a request for help. I need help, okay? And so the meeting will be for that person to bring their challenge to the table, and there is a protocol for how to help that person with the challenge. It's not just, I tell you my challenge, you tell me what to do, and I go home, right? It's really to explore the challenge. You spend 5 minutes telling your challenge, 10 minutes, everybody asks questions to try to find out what really is the problem here. And then you have 20 minutes for everybody to share stories about where they experienced something similar and what worked for them or what didn't. And then in the last few minutes only, you give advice. So they have a protocol for people who want to bring a challenge to the table. So that is the kind of thing that the community of practice will do on one of their monthly Zoom calls.
But they actually have defined for themselves 4 types of activity. This is one of them. Another type of activity they do is, if everybody seems to share the same problem, then they say we need to find a new solution. This is kind of the most innovative moment in that community. And so they share stories of how does this problem manifest for you in Brazil? How does this problem manifest for you in India? How does this problem manifest for you in France? Oh, okay, there are patterns here. And they develop a new solution together.
And then they have something called Voice from the Future. So if one of their members in one of their countries is experiencing something that sooner or later, eventually, everybody will experience. So, for example, I think it's a beer company. In some countries, everybody stopped drinking alcohol, right? And so that company, the people in that country will come as Voice from the Future and say, sooner or later, this is coming to your country. People are going to drink. People are going to drink. People are going to start drinking less alcohol. So we have to start thinking of new beer alternatives. But anyway, somebody who is experiencing something first will come to the rest of the community and say, hey, this is what it's like. And this is what we're doing about it, so that the rest of the countries feel prepared for when it comes to them.
And then they have a fourth kind of activity, what they call ready to document. So if an issue has come back a number of times, and they kind of say, okay, now we understand how to address this kind of problem, then together they produce a document and they put it on the intranet of the organization. So we're not saying that all communities should organize themselves like that, but in that case, for them it works very well. When a member of the community wants to do something, they have a choice of 4 different kinds of activity, and they choose, okay. And everybody knows, like Bev was saying, in the case of the first, everybody knows kind of like how that works. So it's very efficient, because everybody knows the protocol for each kind of activity.
But what we are saying is just, this is the kind of thing that a community of practice is doing, is they're looking at problems of practice, and they are working on how things work or not in practice. Etienne?
Yeah.
I propose, given the time, that we pause and ask for questions, and then, because the rest are more activities.
Yeah, so this is a debate, like a high school debate. The community is doing that. You know, they have 2 issues, they have to choose one solution or another, and they organize kind of a little formal debate. This is the kind of example that Bev was saying, that member there brought in a problem and everybody is discussing it. This is online. So all these activities can be done online. This is a big table where all the different countries in the Caribbean share issues that they have, and they create a big table to kind of understand these issues. And this last one is what we call a cafe. That's often how we start a community of practice. We put people at different tables. We say, okay, what are you struggling with in your practice? What keeps you up at night? You discuss that for a little while. After 10, 15 minutes, everybody changes table. They continue discussing that. And at the end of that exercise, people have a good sense of what the community is struggling with and how they should proceed.
Actually, let me just pause there, because I think that's important. I see the next thing on the agenda is, should we be a community of practice? Right? And very often people are starting communities of practice, and very often we see that what people do is say, okay, let's be a community of practice. Let us decide how we are going to operate together. Let's decide what our objective is. How we start a community of practice is to start by saying, hey guys, what is keeping you up at night in terms of work? What are the kind of issues and challenges, right, that we share here? Which ones are priorities? What could we do together that would help us move further on that issue, that would be much better than doing alone? And then to design an activity that will help us to make progress on that issue. So just that's a little tip for starting a community of practice. So I think we should pause it here. Yeah. So thank you very much, everybody. If anybody has a question. Do we have time for questions, if anyone has one? 5 minutes, one question.
You can ask your question in Portuguese.
say it in English.
Good, good. Easier, better.
So thanks, first of all, for sharing this community of practice. It's very interesting. I'm quite curious to know exactly what is the role of the mediator, because according to what I followed, at the end of a certain time of discussion, the mediator only talks at the end of it, right?
The facilitator, yeah. You know, a community of practice, if you think of like a relationship, think of dating, all right? Some people coming together because they share some common interest, and who knows, maybe their relationship will continue in the future if, when they come together, it's exciting enough and they find enough value in being together. If you think of the facilitator as the matchmaker, the person who knows that these two have something to talk about, right? And is doing what they can. They're turning the lights down low. They're saying, hey, what about going to the museum together? Don't go to a movie. Or maybe go to a movie, but they're making suggestions to try and set up the situation, all right, that people will enjoy their time together, get value from being together, and want to continue. Whether they speak at the beginning, the middle, the end, doesn't matter. As long as they achieve their objective of holding a space for the people in it, that they can learn together and that they can value being together and learning together.
And it's important to say that there are so many different kinds of communities, of different, not kinds, because they are all communities of practice, but they do that differently. Okay? So, you know, you could have a very informal community of practice, people who have a beer on Friday after work, and they talk shop, you know, around a beer. There's no facilitator, nothing, but they still find it a very good learning experience. There are much more formal community of practice where there is a facilitator, like the one I showed you, financed by the World Bank. There is a facilitator, and the facilitator is doing exactly what Bev was saying to kind of help. So, often, if you have an expert there, sometimes it's good to have the expert speak at the end, because then they can address the real problem of people rather than come at the beginning with their speech.
Hang on.
In practical terms, when we're in a kind of more formal discussion or work, the facilitator is kind of circulating around the groups, but he's not actively participating in the discussion of the groups. It's just kind of listening to what is going on and trying to find or to feel if there are people that can come together and work.
Yeah. Usually a facilitator is not somebody who is part of the practice of the people. If they are somebody who share the practice, it can be. Mm-hmm.
And it's possible to have more than one facilitator in the same in a meeting.
Well, certainly that community of Syria, they just take turn, right? Facilitating the meetings.
Right, but in terms of facilitating, let me just say one thing. Any ideology about facilitation, throw it out the window. Yeah. Right? Each circumstance is different. Now, let's just say, if you have people in the room who are also facilitating, if they care about the practice or the domain, then they should say what they know. Okay? If they don't share the practice or the domain, zip. Because they are not part of the group. And And yes,
there is a situation, right? There is a situation that we have seen a few times, right? Where the person who is in charge of leading the community is an expert in the domain. And that's tricky because then they have to learn not to be in this transmission mode, but to be in a mutual engagement mode. So sometimes, if it's an expert who is leading a community, we have to coach them a little bit on how to create a different relationship. You know, and sometimes it's good to just talk at the end to say, okay, this is what I heard. I'm not sure this would work, but we can try, or something like this. So yeah, you know, there are different roles, you know, and the role of a facilitator and the role of an expert are different. And when they are merged together, then you need to manage it a bit so that the community does not become expert-centric, but becomes learning-centric.
And also, I forgot what I was going to say. Yes. For that, we'd need a whole other thing. We have a book that we love with a framework, value creation framework. So we do have a framework for doing that. But if you get him started, then we'll never leave here.
But I just wanted to say, and actually the reason we wrote that book is because we have seen many community facilitators evaluated on things like the number of members, the number of posting on the website, and sort of things like that. You know, how much people sometimes spend, who comes to the meeting and all that. And so this is why we have created a framework that focuses much more on what difference is the community making in practice, the impact that it has, you know, because if you have a community of 3 people who have a lot of impact, is better than a community of 1,000 people when nothing changes, you know. So that's a really difficult, because the problem, of course, is that the impact of the community does not happen in the community. So you need to follow the story of the members who bring the learning in the community into practice.
Is somebody facilitating this? Can we take another question?
Yeah, shut us off.
You think it's important the community have a physical meeting to do this, or make something similar online? You know.
We are of different opinions. Etienne thinks you do need a face-to-face meeting, and the more the better.
I mean,
I am very happy with online. So, yeah.
But, you know, in Almada, you don't really have that problem because, you know, you can
always have that problem.
Almost walk to meet each other, you know.
Yeah. Okay, now, Etienne, enough.
Yeah. But it's good. I would still say it's good if you can, if you don't live too far, and the same time zone, you know.
Physical interaction for me is important. And I don't know if it's something that is needed in this community or not.
If you can have it, yes. But life is such that you often can't have it. And it depends who you want at the table. Because if you want some people at the table and they have children and they can't come, or they're disabled and they can't come, at the minimum, do it hybrid.
But the community in the beer company that these people have never met. Okay, so the community was started online, and maybe one day they'll meet, but
they're very strong. Yeah.
But maybe. Yeah.
So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
And there's one more thing I want to say, is that, so we live in Sesimbra. We have bought a house in Sesimbra that acts as a kind of meeting place. We call it the Social Learning Lab, not because it's a lab like a traditional lab, but because we experiment. This is where we experiment about learning. And the address is Rua da Bella Vista 2. There are two Rua da Bella Vista in Sesimbra, so you have to be careful. You have to take down the zip code because otherwise you'll be in a different place. And it's on March 29th. It's a Saturday, I think.
It is open day. You have to say what it is.
Yeah, it is open day. That's just like we'll have a bit of wine and cookies, and you can come and visit and say hi and chat. It's nothing formal, it's not a workshop, but we'll be there, and if nobody comes, we'll just share a glass of wine. But if you come, then you can have a glass of wine with us.